Welcome to the Retiring Real Estate Investor Podcast, where we will discuss how to defer taxes on the sale of your property, earning passive real estate income, and everything you need to know to go from active investor to passive investor. Join us as we interview passive investment sponsors, explore the journey of other retiring real estate investors, and share our due diligence process we perform to select passive investments. Investment advisory services provided by Insight Investment Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor. This podcast is only intended for clients and interested investors residing in the states in which we are registered to provide investment advisory services or exempt from registration. Please contact us to determine if the firm provides investment advisory services in the state where you reside. All content on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Material presented is believed to be reliable sources, and no representations are made by our firm as to another party's informational accuracy or completeness. Insight Investment Advisors, LLC and its representatives do not provide tax or legal advice, and nothing herein should be construed as such. Always consult with your tax advisor or attorney regarding your specific circumstances. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Retiring Real Estate Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Bruckman. I'm excited to be joined by our first legal eagle to bring on to the pod, Tilden Moschetti. Thank you so much for hopping on and talking to us today. I was looking at your LinkedIn before the show, and this is the syndicator and fund manager's attorney. You are the guy.
Yeah, I hope I am the guy. Yeah. So, well, thanks for, before we do that though, Bo, thank you for having me on your show. I'm really excited to be here and hopefully can help your listeners with some great stuff.
No, that's awesome. We were talking a little bit pre-show about, the structures that some of our investors are facing are, for many of them, the first time they've ever seen anything like this before. They're very unfamiliar with it. So this will be very helpful. First, let's give our listeners some background of how'd you get here? What was your journey and how'd you end up in this space?
Sure. So I was, out of college, I went, got an MBA and had kind of decided that I was going to be a real estate developer. As I looked around, I saw a lot of other developers that were in my area at the time were also attorneys. And I thought, oh, okay, that makes sense. You understand property law and you understand those things. So I'm going to go to law school as well. It'll make it easier for me. So I went to law school, took all the courses, primarily were focused in real estate or in securities or in, business oriented stuff. And towards the end of my career, my law school career, I got a little sidetracked and did a program in basically trial law. And so I really liked it. I liked the adrenaline rush from it. But it was also a closed community and it wasn't real life. So I, out of law school, I worked for the district attorney for a while. I then hung out my own shingle, doing just litigation on real estate. So if it dealt with real estate is a property or valuation type issue, those were the kinds of things I took. So partnership disputes, divorces, bankruptcies, whatever it was, as long as it had an undertone of real estate. I did that for 10 years and it was very painful. The world of, mock trials is very different than the real thing. It's a lot of stress. And so I didn't like it very much. I started working on transitioning out and started dabbling in some real estate brokerage and things like that. And I had during that time on the real estate brokerage side, one of the people I did work with came up to me and showed me a deal, and it was in Alabama, and he said, "Wow, you got to see this deal. It's really great." So I looked at it and was like, "Oh, wow, that is a really good deal. How are you getting it so cheap?" And it was still under development, and so it had some real real great possibilities. And he said, "Yeah, we should syndicate." And I was like, "Oh, sure." I have no idea what that is, but
It sounds awesome.
We can do that. I could figure out basically what he was talking about, and so I'm a lawyer. I can kind of figure out how to do this. It took a little while. Uh, it ended up, we put the deal together and made good money, and clients made good money, and everybody was happy, and did another deal and did another deal. And I thought, oh, well, why am I trying to close my law practice when, I'm good at this and I enjoy this side of it? So why don't I transition over to just helping syndicators out? And so that's what I did. That was about 10 years ago, and it's been really great since. That's how I got here.
Oh, that's awesome. It's a great story of kind of wandering down this path a little bit, but with some guardrails, right? You kind of knew where
Yeah,
you're headed from
yeah,
a law perspective and a real estate perspective, and you kind of stumbled upon the syndication side. Let's get into that maybe as a starting point, as the syndication side. What are the top things as we look at the structure? Investors coming to this maybe for the first time. A lot of our investors are coming out of active real estate to passive. It's the first time
yeah.
they've seen a syndication. They're the same way, right? Like, what's a syndication, right? And so the first time they've seen the structure, what are some of the things they should be watching out for?
I mean, the biggest thing that I tell, my clients who are the syndicators, and that I would certainly tell your clients too, is it all comes down to trust, right? So, uh, syndicators are never going to get anybody to invest in their deals unless the investor trusts them, and unless they've earned that trust. And the flip side of the coin is, don't go into here's the free bit of legal advice. Don't go into a deal if you don't trust the people behind it. Just don't do it.
Mhm.
It's not going to go well. But if that trust is there, then it starts being interesting. Um, so that's kind of the most important thing that needs to take place. It is a legitimate system. There are a set of rules. Almost everybody uses Regulation D from the SEC, which is a set of rules that have kind of evolved over time. It really started in the 80s, but really was very unworkable in the 80s. Got much better with the Jobs Act, got even better in 2013, and then even better again in 2017, which is that's the same set of rules that we're using now. So investors are able to come into these deals and they're buying what is a security. So rather than owning the actual title to the property here, what investors are actually getting is a piece of an LLC or a limited partnership or something like that. And so when you break things up like that, it stops being like that fee simple title that you think about when you're buying real estate. It's now you're buying a security. And so there's certain rules that certainly the sponsors are required to follow in order to make those available and so that they can get paid.
Mhm.
And those are the rules that are underneath Regulation D. And so your listeners definitely want to know this is a legitimate thing. There are rules that govern it, and it's important to make sure that the rules are being followed, not only because I mean, most of the rules are there to protect the listener, the regular investors anyway. But if the rules aren't being followed, there's probably more systemic issues at play there. Like if if it's under Regulation D, but there's not going to be a filing with the SEC, that's kind of strange. Or if there's people getting paid finder fees, which isn't allowed, then why is that going on? Those are like chinks in the armor that maybe this isn't the best deal, and maybe there's other deals that are better.
Mhm. You mentioned a couple of those pieces in Reg D. Can you walk through some of those from a high level, those high level rules that we should be looking for? Definitely
Yeah,
the registration and the finder's fee type things that may be going on. What else is sort of red flaggish for investors?
sure. So there's two big main rules that these investments tend to fall under. Rule 506B and Rule 506C. Both let the sponsors raise an unlimited amount of money from an unlimited number of accredited investors, and sometimes to non-accredited investors.
Mhm.
And if they choose to go with non-accredited investors, that's great. It's Rule 506B, but they're not allowed to advertise, so they can't put it on the internet. So if you are a non-accredited investor and you see an ad on the internet, you're not allowed to go invest in that. And if the sponsor thinks you are, then they're wrong. So if it's under Rule 506B or C, it could be under Regulation A, which is different, and they would be. So that's one of those things that you would see. If it's under Rule 506C, they can advertise to their heart's content. They can put an ad on Main Street. But when you see in that subtext, this is open for accredited investors only, that's kind of the tip off. It's probably under Rule 506C, and they're going to need some sort of verification that you're an accredited investor. And that's good. That's good that you see that, because that tells you, okay, this person knows what they're doing and they put together the deal at least that much in the right way, right? So that way it's probably legit. So take comfort in seeing that kind of language there.
Yeah, I think first blush for some folks is this seems restrictive from an accredited investor perspective, and no, I'd agree with you. This is a good thing. And we have evolving accredited investor rules that may be coming down the pipeline as well. So things may be changing a little bit. You mentioned, I just want to pivot a little bit. You mentioned Reg A. I just saw some of these things. I just saw that yesterday in some offerings. Can you talk about Reg A and how it's definitely different?
Sure. Reg A is also sometimes called like a mini IPO or something like that. So under Reg D, it is just a filing. So it's about a 5-page form gets filed with the SEC, and that's it. There's no review. They do not look at these pieces of paper unless there's a problem. Under Reg A, it's different. So there, a form is filed with the SEC, and the staff attorneys at the SEC review it. And they make sure that it's adequately described, that there's a reasonable basis that people can make money, that this does look like a legitimate thing, and that all the boxes are ticked. They provide the right financial information, etc. So that because of that status, because it's been reviewed by the SEC from a formalistic point of view, it's not the same as going public, but it looks pretty good. The SEC says, okay, you can raise under Regulation A. You can raise up to $50 million even, but it needs to go through all these checks in order to do it. But then we don't mind that non-accredited investors are coming in. That's fine. You can advertise and they can still come in because we've done this review, and so the chances of fraud are much, much less.
Yeah, it's fascinating it seems like you can democratize some of these investments in that way by going through the Reg A route. There's just a few more hoops to jump through there from catching
more hoops and a lot more money from the sponsors. It takes a lot longer. It takes between 6 to 9 months to get it through, and costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 and $150,000 to get that stamp of it.
Interesting. So that kind of dovetails a little bit into what I've always been wondering from a sponsor syndicator perspective. It seems like there's a few different options and ways to structure the deal they're thinking about. How should they think their way through that? What's best for them? Is it GPLP syndication? Is it Reg A? Is it a fund? Is it a REIT? How do you help them sort of think through which one of those avenues to run down?
Sure. So let's separate REIT from. So REITs are either public or private offerings. You can do a REIT through a Reg D or even through a Reg A. It's more of a tax status than anything else. But I would think about putting REITs in the umbrella of, if I'm expecting to make cash flow on this deal, a REIT might be an appropriate structure for that thing that we're investing into. If it's not a cash flow deal, it's not a REIT. It just doesn't fit into there. It's outside of what the whole benefit of under the tax code would be. So if you're looking for that, cookie cutter or that mailbox money check, REITs are a great choice. If you're looking for, you don't really need the cash necessarily, but you're looking for, that big massive appreciation, either from a development or from just the regular appreciation or value add going on, then it's probably in this Reg A space, or probably even more likely in the Reg D space. If it's a Reg A's tend to be larger portfolios of money because it takes so long to put the deals together. So they tend to be portfolios with some sort of pop at the end still. They might have some cash flow, but it's still going to have a limited duration of probably 5 to 7 years of that investment hold time.
Makes sense. Yeah, I watch a lot of syndicators struggle between should I do a fund, or am I continuing to raise for single asset, and how do I sort of think about that? And that's sort of interesting. Do you watch most syndicators make that? Is that an evolution where it's one asset syndication and then to fund, or how do you see that?
It used to be. Now it's so mixed. I mean, my client base is like of the first timers that I represent. It's really mixed now. It used to be always you do several direct deals and then you can go to a fund. Now I've got a lot of people who are just doing funds, and that has a lot to do with just inventory. So if they are trying to raise a pool of money, because they want to buy a property, but that property isn't there yet, they're trying to get ready for it. It's going to be kind of in a fund structure just because of the nature of the way that money is. Whereas once that property is identified and they know that's the deal, it's going to be a direct deal. And then you probably aren't going to even do a fund anyway. It probably doesn't make sense to even think about it that way. So it's more a matter of, well, how long does it take me to close this deal? How quickly do I need the money? A lot of times is part of that decision making.
Yeah, I think I watch folks on that, the syndicator sponsors on that, thinking about the fund side of thinking about, I'm raising every time I want to purchase an asset and do a deal. I'm raising for one, for two, for three. Why don't I just do that once? I'll raise once in the fund, and that'll give me the flexibility to sort of do what I want to do there from an acquisition perspective, and it cuts down on my raise time.
And the harder part, the reason why you don't, is because it's hard. It's harder, right? I mean, your investors know if I go to your investors and I say, "Hey, give me $100,000, and I'm going to go buy a bunch of stuff and make you some money." It's not that appealing, right? And that's the fun model. It's I'm going to go buy a bunch of stuff, and it probably will look something like this. That's not nearly as like building that level of trust as, hey, give me the $100,000. I'm going to go buy 123 Main Street. Here's the whole plan of it. And this is why I think we're going to get out with a 20% IRR and you're going to make some money, right? That's like, oh, okay. Now I know what the plan is. They need to trust me a little bit less because I've already built in that trust because this is the plan. So I don't have to, there doesn't have to be this blind trust that goes along with it.
Makes us nervous. So it makes us nervous too from our perspective when I can touch, feel, see the asset. It's like, okay, I can do due diligence.
Right by it. It's there.
I can do the homework on it. It's a fund. We sort of stop our homework and go, okay.
Yeah. You don't know what it is. You can look at sample deals and past history, but there's very little that you get to actually see about, well, how's it all going to shake out?
How is that? We talked a little bit about, maybe staying on funds for a second. We talked a little bit about the sort of GPLP and how investors should look at that. How should they look at the docs for a fund differently, or differently at all?
I think you want to read into the documents. Primarily it'll be in the PPM to figure out what the plan is. I mean, typically when I'm drafting, it's, I'll put it in my executive summary, certainly kind of what the big picture plan is. And so I guess that's where to start, is to see how does this make sense, and then go to the distributions and make sure that the distributions feel like they match up with what that general overall plan is. Like if it's, hey, I'm going to go buy a portfolio of properties I'm going to buy 10 properties and they're going to be like this. They're not going to be big pops. All they're going to do is, 10 nice, good Class A buildings. And I go to the distribution section and all I'm seeing is about capital events and payments during capital events, or they're paying me out on a every 3 years or something strange. Something's odd, because the distribution model doesn't match with what that fund model is. That fund model should be paying quarterly, regular distributions, and then in sale it's going to do this. On the other side, if it's got a lot about distributions on cash flow, but really we're doing a ground up development, you're not getting cash flow on a ground up development. Like, it's super unlikely. I actually do include it in my PPMs. That's a long story why. But it shouldn't be like, this is the main thing. Wow, we're getting all this cash flow, because you're not. It's just not, it's not real. And again, that's part of that whole trusting the investor or the syndicator as well.
That's good. When you are drafting some of the PPMs, what's often the biggest piece of advice you're giving sponsor syndicators, and maybe a tilt towards some of the first timers? What are you telling folks as you put those documents together?
So this will be a little strange for your investors to hear.
No, this will be good for them to hear. I want them to hear this.
But I say it publicly on YouTube and stuff, so it's not. But my advice to sponsors is always make as much money as you can, but still make the investment something that's investable. So, I'm always telling them, where if their fees are too low, I make it clear that they could ask for more. It's not, sometimes they don't want to. And that, I don't have any skin in the game on what their choices are. But, I want them to know, hey, you can make more money here, because your product is probably still very marketable based on, what I see out there in the market. And that, I think, is also a good thing for investors to kind of get in their minds about, is that the sponsor needs to be properly incented to do this. If they're not making money, you probably got a dud. There's why is anybody doing it? The sponsor should have never put this deal together. They're not going to be interested in it. You're not going to make as much money as in it. I see the fact that the sponsors are making good money as a very positive thing. Especially if it's on that proceeds side. It's nice to have the fees section less, and then the proceeds section high. So that's probably the one thing that I've talked about with probably every client. And then I don't really need to go on with my clients about it much. They're all very good and trustworthy people, but I always disclose everything. Your investors are gold. Do not mess with them, right? They deserve lots of communication. They deserve to know exactly why everything's going on. Give it to them. All you're going to end up with at the end of the day is more investors, as long as you treat them well. So that's the other part of the talk I give them. Not that they really need it, but it's a good thing for them to always remember.
As many times as you're going to say that, keep saying it. We'll take it. And just a comment on the fee side. I'm 100% with you, and we're very, very transparent with our investor class about where the fees are, who's getting paid, and then why. I don't want. We're paying someone to perform a service for us, and they expect to be compensated for that service. Period. Right. So when we're nickel and diming, when I have folks nickel and diming from my desk on fees and fee structure, I'm like, yeah, it's a factor, but it's one factor of many factors that should lead us to making a good investment decision. It's not the factor. Yeah. So I definitely roll folks back from that. Like, stop staring at those and stare more at the quality of the assets that we're purchasing, and expect to pay people to do a service that's not free.
Yeah. I mean, when I do my own deals, I put out the terms. I don't negotiate terms at all. I went out for my own deals, and this is the deal. I'd love to have you in it. Doesn't work for you, that's fine. We'll talk about the next deal. But yeah, certainly the nickel and diming is, yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah, it's and there's I mean there's a line there, right? I mean there's some we have looked at a variety of investments that we've not put in front of our investors where there are issues in fee structure and there are some misaligned incentives there. It happens. But it's pretty rare. It's rare that I see that. More often if we do reject things, it's more about the property and economics and the plan that we have qualms or issues about. It's very rarely the fees and the fee structure. Doesn't happen. Maybe a little bit on a lot of our investors that are listening are have utilized DSTs inside of a 1031 exchange. Maybe different animal here than GPLP syndication, Reg D. Yeah, right. Maybe talk a little bit through that from your lens and your perspective as someone structuring those PPMs about DST.
Yeah, they are. DSTs are fantastic for what they do, right? So it's really the only mechanism that works for doing a 1031 exchange into a property that has multiple owners, like a syndication. So because I always get the other side of the coin of, hey, can I get people to 1031 into my just regular Reg D offering? My answer is always, well, kind of, but don't do it. It's a nightmare. In the DST world, it's really not a nightmare. It's really quite a good system. The challenges on it are mostly technical and really fall on the sponsor more than the investor. It's very challenging to make the whole management plan of the property work properly. If there's loans that are going to be coming on, that's a whole nother nightmare for the sponsor. It's not really for you as an investor. And it is a system that is really, really well tested. So from an investor point of view, fantastic. They work great. There's a lot of companies that do DSTs that are very reputable, have tons of repeat work, and are terrific. And because of the challenges of putting DSTs together, you do not see a lot of fraud going on outside because it's too difficult from a sponsor to put it together when it's legit. So if you were trying to put something together that wasn't good, boy, I don't know that you'd ever be successful on doing it. So that's the good news. DSTs are great. Yeah.
Talk about some of those challenges from the sponsor perspective. I think it'd be good for investors to understand, like, putting this thing together is not easy.
Well, I mean, the big problem is that you cannot really have more money or more capital coming into the DST after it's gotten started, which can be a real problem if down the road you would typically be able to do a capital call. Now you can't. And so all that needs to be kind of decided up front about, well, how are we going to structure this so there's enough money if we do have some sort of event that needs it. Dealing with tenants, and how are we going to deal with tenants if there's tenant improvements that need to be made, or what's that structure look like, and then putting a loan together so that way when the money comes in, it doesn't just trigger a whole new set of problems. Becomes the real challenge. So it's really that coming up with the plan that cannot change during the 5-7 years that you're going to own this thing. Things can happen really easily, and the manager can't get paid for it after the fact, right? So from a sponsor point of view, it's like you got to make sure that you made your money because you're not getting more. Makes it super challenging to do it right.
Do you see in that structure, here comes a way too technical question for folks, but we're going to ask it anyways. In the GPLP syndication structure, we often see some level of profit sharing, which you can't technically do on the bottom line inside of a DST. It would make it look like a partnership. Right. But
Right.
I do see some revenue hurdles, additional rent bumps, and additional sponsor splitting of revenue at the gross line. Is that okay? Or are folks kind of wandering along a
Probably,
gray line there?
probably you'd need to talk to a tax attorney about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yep, went too far.
That's beyond my level.
We'll figure that one out. I know on the bottom line it gets you cannot be handling you cannot be doing that down there. There's no 60
Yeah.
70 30 splits. Can't do that in DST land.
And that makes it really hard. I mean, there's so much more wiggle room on, and in a regular Reg D offering, when things get, if I'm trying to raise $10 million and I've raised $9 million, I can get creative on the and on that last million if I need to by making, incenting other investors to invest more and things like that and give away GP share and things like that. Don't ask your sponsors to do it. This is only desperate times. That's the aside.
Mhm.
But I know it's doable. It's not doable in the DST world. It's this is the raise, this is the amount, that's it. We're gonna sink or swim. So
And this is why we don't see value add properties in a DST. It's too difficult without the
because because even the cost, even like if I suddenly needed to buy a nail that I didn't know I was there, if it's not part of the budget and part of the plan, you can't do it.
yeah.
I mean, you could give it away for free, so that's what sometimes the sponsors will do. But yeah, there's no way to charge to charge it back to the investor.
You mentioned the DST being an optimal structure, great for what it is for 1031 exchange investors who
Yeah.
want passive come into it. You also mentioned it's sort of a nightmare to think about those investors coming into a syndication. Walk through that for our listeners, for folks that are trying to do. I
Oh,
assume you're alluding to folks trying to tick in addition to the GPL piece.
yeah.
Walk through that nightmare for us.
Well, I mean, it really comes. You're trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. So you're basically taking this thing that's a security, and then you're trying to cram this real estate component on top of it. And that's because, yeah, you need to have you need to have basically two ticks. Whoever's 1031ing in needs to have that in as a tick. It just has to be that way. Otherwise, it's not a like kind. Those investors coming with that money going into a syndication is not like kind for the security. So if you tried to do it, you'd blow their exchange. They'd owe money. So when you build this structure, you also can't do really a management fee properly. All the cash that comes into a property needs to go into an account that is proportionate to the ownership of the ticks, or it's going to blow their exchange. Which, if you've got one major tenant and, like, let's say it's an industrial building, how are you going to even do it? I mean, you've got this big check coming in. Somehow you've got to get the money over into the tick account and then get the money over into the syndication account. And then you've got the problem of how does the tick guy pay out the manager or the sponsor of the deal? Because they're not really supposed to have anything more than maybe like a property manager type role,
Mhm.
but you're paying them more. And if you're trying to do profit splits, it just gets way out of hand. I've done it a few times. It's never gone well I mean, the syndication part goes fine, but it does not go well from structuring the tick kind. I have to insist, okay, you have to have whoever's doing the exchange has their own tax attorney, and
Mhm.
you need your own tax attorney, and you guys work this out because I don't do taxes. I don't do that kind of level of thing. And where it's going to blow up, it's going to blow up on that part right there. And it's going to kill somebody's exchange, and there's going to be a lawsuit for not doing it. So yeah, it's a big disaster. The
Just do
simple answer is don't do it. It don't. There's more money out there to raise. Those people can go into DSTs. It works fine. This stuff doesn't.
we've been harping on. I appreciate you describing it that way. We've been harping on this with syndicators for a long time. That we'll just do a tick, like that's easy. I'm like, no, it's not. It's
Actual like putting that on title is about the easiest part, and that's about it. The rest of it is not. And it's not. And it's not the syndicator who suffers when there's a mistake. I mean, it's gonna be their investor,
Mhm.
and they're gonna blow their exchange. I mean, some states are like itching to blow it up, right? They would be happy to just destroy. They hate 1031 exchanges that they exist. Like some states, like California, make you file every single year a statement on your exchange thing. Like even if you're going to hold it for like 30 years, they're just mean about it. So
Yeah.
they would be happy to blow your exchange. They want to, and yeah, so don't do it.
You're making some government official's day. Like, don't do that. Don't make them
I
excited.
mean, that's really my job. The happier I keep the people who keep track of the rules, the better, right? So I don't. My sponsors need to be crystal clean and you know, and keep all the regulators at bay. So regulators have no problem with people following the rules. They only have a problem when people don't follow the rules.
And we feel the same way about the regulators that come to our door too.
Yeah.
They're very happy with us because we're transparent and follow the rules, and
Yep.
we like that too. Like, we'll have a good time with those conversations. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It sounds like, so I want to talk a little bit about the customers that you're serving, the syndicators and sponsors you're serving. It sounds like it's up and down the spectrum in terms of experience.
Oh yeah.
Or maybe talk a little bit about what is a typical sponsor syndicator coming to you? What do they look like? Who should come to you?
Yeah, so I probably about 80% of my business is real estate syndicators or funds. Um, a lot of developers, a lot of people coming out of fix and like have done a lot of fix and flips and are now trying to put together either a fund or trying to scale up from fixing and flipping single family homes to doing that with like larger multifamily properties or commercial properties or things like that. Fair number of hard money lenders looking for more capital to lend out. That's about 80%. The other 10% is probably businesses looking to raise additional capital. And then the last 10% is just sort of a mix of things from hedge fund kind of models to kind of weird private equity like acquisitional models or some crypto stuff, or things like
that. Oh, fun. Fun.
Yeah.
That's the 10% of the interesting bucket where you never quite know what might hit your desk any given day, huh?
Yeah, it's at this point though, it's pretty unusual. Normally it's about once every 6 months I'll hear something I am. So, it's always great when they're the person. So
Exactly. Tilden, this has been awesome. I would tell our investors, I would ask you where our investors can find you, but I don't think we want them to. This is not for you, investors. Don't.
So if you want to put together a deal for yourself and start a syndication, then they can find me online at moschettilaw.com. And otherwise, yeah, I work just for syndicators and sponsors, just in the Reg D space. There are attorneys out there that work with investors, and getting a review of the PPM or things. They're a great resource. A lot of accountants also are pretty well versed. People in finance are well versed. They may not be able to give you the legal nuances, but they can probably walk through the deal and tell you if the deal looks like the right thing or not. And then, just ask around on those. But if you want to put together a deal for yourself, then I'm your person.
We got a few syndicator sponsor folks listening too. So this is the man to reach out to. Come and contact him. Thank you again so much for hopping on. This is great information for folks. These are so important. These are the building blocks of the deals that we all do, is making sure that these structures are correct. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for the information, and thank you for hopping on with us.
You bet. Thank you very much for having me.
And to our listeners, thanks for listening. We will talk to you again. Take care.